Awesome. The Dark Ages. Following the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, Greece entered a bleak period that lasted for 300 years, 1100 BCE to 800 BCE. Historians have named this period the Dark Ages in Greek history, partly because we know so little about these years. It was a time when new raiding parties arrived from the north, dispersing the Greek-speaking people all around the Aegean Sea. The new invaders from the northwest, the Dorians, spoke a different dialect of Greek. To escape the Dorians' approach, mainland Greeks took refuge across the
The Aegean. Aegean.
Aegean in Asia Minor. Refugees from Thessaly and Boeotia, speaking the alien dialect of Greek, moved across to Lesbos and the adjacent mainland. People of central Greece and Peloponnese, the former Achaeans, escaped to Ionia, or Central Asia Minor, and became known as the Ionians.
The Ionians. Yeah.
Ionians.
Good.
The achievements of Messian civilization in construction, art, monument buildings, and writing were lost or forgotten. In their trek south, the invaders wiped out farming communities, drastically reducing the food supply. Famine struck, and the Greek population rapidly declined. One of the tougher Dorian tribes dominated most of the southern Peloponnese. From here, in about 900 BCE, they spread out to
settle roads.
Sorry, it's kind of like cut off.
Yes.
Crete.
Yep.
And other islands in the Aegean.
The Aegean, yeah.
Aegean. Why do I keep messing that up? Sorry.
Thank you. So, yeah, what Sarah just read was just a recap of what happened to the Mycenaeans after Troy, after the Trojan War. The Dorians from Macedonia, from the northwest of Greece, came down, wiped out the Greeks. Roughly 75% of the population went into decline. And they ended up spreading. They ended up dispersing to different islands. Crete, Rhodes, Ionia, etc. Lesbos. Excellent, thank you. So this brought us into the Dark Ages for a couple hundred years for the Greeks. Not a good time. But things get better. Okay, things start to improve. And now we have the rise of the city-state and the age of colonization. Sabrina.
Okay, the rise of the city-state and the age of colonization. Despite the hardships of the Dark Ages, Greeks gradually developed small, secure, and independent communities. These communities formed the basis of the Greek city-state, or polis. Polis means community or people. Even at its largest, a polis rarely exceeded 20,000 people and was more like a town than a city. The two major exceptions were Athens, with its surrounding villages, and Attica that covered about 2,500 kilometers squared, and Sparta, which came to control 2/5 of the Peloponnese. By the middle of the 8th century BCE, the population of the Greek world was growing once again, and putting a strain on the available food supply. The Greeks needed to find additional land to grow more food, and needed to resettle some of the people from the overcrowded city-states. Colonization, therefore, became essential. Various city-states launched a search for apoikai, or away homes. Their goal was to create colonies that would become self-sufficient, bound to the parent city only by trade.
Good. So as the population began to grow, okay, in the 700s, they needed to look for new land, new resources, right? So they started to expand. They started to colonize. Okay. Go ahead.
The first Greek colony was established in 750 BCE on the Bay of Naples. During the next century, Greek cities appeared on almost every fertile coastal plain in Sicily and southern Italy, and eventually in parts of northern Africa, Spain, and France. The greatest of the colonies was Syracuse in Sicily. the population of which grew to over 100,000 people by the 5th century BCE.
Yeah.
A second wave of colonization occurred around 650 BCE. During this period, the Greeks founded a chain of cities all around the Black Sea to give them access to Crimean wheat. Greek galleys called uh,
Triremes.
triremes piled the waters of the Mediterranean as well in search of timber.
Good. So the Greek boats or Greek smaller ships are called triremes. Okay. And so yeah, so first they colonized Sicily, the Sicilian island, okay, at Syracuse, and then many islands around the Black Sea. That was the second wave of colonization. Good. Keep going.
Important developments marked this period of colonization in ancient Greece. Because of the upsurge in trade, metal currency came into common use. A new middle class emerged, made up of the people who made their living through commerce and industry rather than from the land. The Greeks learned how to use the iron, and from the Phoenicians adopted the alphabet that would be passed down to us by way of the Romans. Medics, foreign craftspeople, and traders were welcome in mainland city-states, although they did not enjoy the same rights as the native population. Some city-states began to specialize in particular products. Athens, for example, produced a great deal of pottery. During this period as well, the first Olympic Games were held around 776 BCE, and Homer wrote his first great literary works, 700 BCE. Growth, exploration, trade, the exchange of ideas, the glorification of past heroes and exploits in Homer's poems, all of these factors played a crucial role in the development of Greek society. Ancient Greek was on the verge of its greatest period.
Thank you so much. So, wow. So we had the Mycenaeans in Troy roughly about 1250 BC. Okay. Then around 1100, we enter the Dark Ages, a very bleak, difficult time for the Greeks. And around 750, they start to expand. They start to grow. They start to colonize. And this is when we get great things like literature, right? The epics, the beginning of the Olympics, and all these great things from ancient Greece. It starts now in the Archaic period of ancient Greece. Okay? Homer's poems, trade, right? And of course, 776, the Olympics. And of course, you can't forget them adopting from the Phoenicians the alphabet. That's going to be very important for our language. So let's recap. Let's recap from the Dark Ages. Tina.
So the Dark Ages, 1100 to 800 BC. It refers to the period after the decline of the Mycenaean society and before the colonization movement. The period is categorized by poverty, disruption, and backwardness to literacy disappear to no written records. There are some possible reasons why. What are people doing instead? Farming, not enjoying life, no leisure time, there was no trade, no generating of lists or writing. Should I continue?
Yes, the big bad Dorians.
Okay, so the Dorians. There are three branches of the same race of Indo-Europeans from the Dunabi area who invaded northern Greece around 1200 BC. They settled in Peloponnesus and the islands of the Aegean. It took about 100 years for the Dorians to gain control of Greece and undermine its Bronze Age civilization.
The results. Yep.
So the results. The invaders wiped out the achievements of the Mycenaeans in construction, art, monuments, and writing. They subjected local inhabitants to slavery. Farming communities suffered, reducing the food supply, causing the Greek population to decline. Strongly influenced the development of Greek culture, Doric columns, which became a central feature of Greek architecture. Ionians, refugees from Athens, migrated to Paros, Naxos, Samos, Chios, and the coast of Asia Minor, Ionia. Many later Ionians were conscious of their strong ties to their original homeland, and their leaders could trace their descendants to Mycenae. They kept their old religion, language, social customs, and pottery, but admitted new ideas, for example, the Phoenician alphabet and silver coins. Aeolians refugees from central Greece.
Good. Thank you so much. So the second page here is
Okay.
just a recap of what happened in the Dark Ages. Okay. So again, many of you are probably wondering why, there's so many people who live on, there's so many islands in Greece, so many islands, right? And it's about this time when they're starting to disperse, when they're starting to travel, okay, when they're starting to leave the mainland. Okay, thank you. So next, we are going to move to Greek colonization. Okay, this period here. City-states, colonization, and trade. I'm going to choose a new reader for me this time. Who wants to read? Give me a new reader. Kyle, are you up for reading? Do you want to read, Kyle? Okay, Mr. Sweeney, are you ready?
Yeah, I'll read.
Awesome.
City-states, colonization, and trade. Classical Greece. Colonization 800 to 500 BC. Greeks embark on a widespread colonization movement for three reasons. Land shortage of fertile land couldn't support population. Greek traders were in contact with Sicily,
Sicily.
Italy, Syria, Egypt.
Good.
Political and social discontent, nobles promoted colonization to gain wealth and power.
Good. Thank you. Let me just put this down in the chat. So reasons for colonization and expansion: land shortage, increased trade and wealth, and political, right? Political and social. And what were the results, Kyle?
Results were increase in agriculture.
Yep.
Trade and industry grew. Colonies provide raw materials, gold, metal, timber, grain to homeland. Manufactured finished products, pottery, metal, and textiles. And slavery increases.
Good. So like any major power that begins to colonize other territories, right? The trade and industry grows, right? It brings in new raw materials. In this case, it was timber and gold and grain and different metals. The Greeks adopt currency at this time as well. And of course, the Greeks, yes, even the Greeks had slavery. Slavery increases, okay? Slavery was popular throughout the Greek and Roman world. Okay. Adrian, what were the consequences of colonization?
Metal currency came into use. No middle class
New.
emerged.
Yeah.
Greeks learned to use iron.
Yeah, learned.
Yeah. Adopt alphabet from Finnish. I can't pronounce that. Sorry.
Phoenician.
Phonicans is how you pronounce it.
The Phoenicians.
Phoenicians. Emergence of city-state due to increased trade.
Good. So this is important too, the consequences. Like I said, currency, middle class emerges. The Iron Age, remember the Iron Age comes into play around 1000 BC. So the Greeks are late with the Iron Age, roughly around 700. The alphabet, boy, is that important. And the emergence of new city-states. City-states. All right, now my favorite, maps. Let's take a look at this map. In blue, you have Hellenization or Greek, the spread of Greek culture and colonies. Here is Greece. Here's Crete. Here's Rhodes. Here's Lesbos. Corinth. Athens is in here. Here's Sicily. Here is the Sicilian island. Here's Syracuse at the south. Here's Italy. Here was the second wave. Here's the Black Sea, so around this area. So this is Greek colonization. Look at what they were able to do here. And of course, here in yellow, this is called the Carthaginian. So these are the Phoenicians. Okay, Carthaginian are also Phoenician. And they are two great traders from North Africa or Tunisia, what today would be Tunisia, here, Carthage. So the Italians, especially in southern Italy, adopted Greek culture, right? Greco-Roman. So much of Italian culture comes from Greek culture, especially in the south. Any questions looking at this map? Any questions here? I mean, this is important stuff here. This is big in the Mediterranean world. Okay. So I'm going to give you guys some time to copy or go through this PowerPoint again. I'll give you maybe 10 minutes if you can just copy this down, just these few points. Okay. Colonization and consequences. Either copy them down or just quickly review them, and we will move on. This PowerPoint here. Okay. Okay, so we are going to move on. Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I will definitely check it out. Okay, I will definitely check this out. Okay. I'm going to show you a video right now on archaic Greece, just to go over some things we've learned and also some new interesting points. Okay. Because next we're going to be looking at sculpture, architecture, and other types of things that came out of the archaic period of Greece. So let's just watch this one right here. Ancient Greek History, Chapter 4. Archaic Greece and the Greek city-state.
Welcome to the fourth video on ancient Greece. Today we are going to be examining the Archaic Greek time period and the rise of the polis. So when we talk about Archaic Greece, we are really talking about a transition. Now, any time in history when we classify a new period, some sort of transition is taking place. Some key event is causing us to create a new time period. And in this case, this is a transition from the Dark Ages. So if you remember in the last video, we talked about the Dark Ages being a time of great poverty. There was really no ability to learn. And there was an absence of a writing system. Writing was gone from Greece. And also people were becoming more nomadic, more spread out. There were very few villages. There were no cities. And people, if they were together, were in very small villages. Now what happens in archaic Greece, we begin to move more towards a community setting. And that starts, of course, with the development of the polis. The epic story of Western civilization really starts to get going during the archaic time period. So let's give a brief timeline here, as I always like to do, just so you can get an idea of the dates involved. Archaic Greece occurred approximately from 800 to 500 or 480 BC, right up into the time of Leonidas and his 300 Spartans. Writing came back to Greece, as I mentioned, around 800 BC. So this was the new Greek alphabet. I will emphasize that it was a different writing system than the Mycenaean writing system. Now, the Greek polis started somewhere between 800 BC and 700 BC. Again, we don't have a firm date or year, but it probably is closer to around 800 BC. And it was developed in tandem, probably, and I use these words probably. Again, we don't have any direct evidence, but it's probably developed along with the phalanx. And we will get into the phalanx in the next video. That deserves its own video. And the first Olympic Games occurred in 776 BC. And this is pretty important from the standpoint, this was not a local event. This saw several Greek city-states take part in it. And again, this represents not only the rise of the polis, but the movement more towards a community setting in mainland Greece. People are back in contact with each other, enough so that they can throw in Olympic Games and can have competitors from all around Greece. Okay, so let's move along here. So remember that the two keys to archaic Greece are writing returns and the rise of the Greek polis. And we're going to go into both of those right now in a lot more detail. So let's start with writing first. If you remember a little bit ago, I said the key aspect of the Dark Ages is the absence of writing. And in the period before the Dark Ages, the Mycenaeans had writing. And now it's back again in archaic Greece. So the Mycenaeans had it, the Greek Dark Ages lost it, and now it's back in the archaic Greek world. But this is not the writing system of the Mycenaeans. It's a new alphabet, probably borrowed from the Phoenicians, probably borrowed but expanded upon by the Greeks. And that's another point I'd like to make. We kind of like to think of the Greeks as inventing and discovering everything, but they are also the great borrowers in history. And when they borrow things, they usually improve it so that they can make it useful for their own society. So new vowels were supplied and the alphabet is greatly improved upon. Now, the earliest writings that we have with this new Greek alphabet are found on pottery and stone. And perhaps all importantly here, the Homeric epics are for the first time written down so they no longer have to be passed down orally. Okay, so let's move on to the polis. And this is the monumental development in Greek history and Western civilization for that matter. So we need to go over a couple slides here because there's several points that I'd like to make. It's a new form of government that, as you know now, is called a polis or city-state. So, like I said before, this is a movement away from isolation in those small villages in the Greek Dark Ages to more populated cities. This is an entirely different world for the Greeks, and the polis will become the most important unit in classical Greece. We talked about the community a little bit before, and the concept of a community is very important to the Greeks. The polis will become the center of life for everything they do. So since you lived in a community, the community should be placed above everything, even for the individual. Nowhere is the placement above the individual more evident than in Sparta, which takes this concept to the highest extreme. And we'll get into the Spartans in later videos. So all of this relates to the idea of the ethos, or the Greek value system. Loyalty to the polis was considered one of the highest values a man could have living in civilized ancient Greece. Okay, so let's move along to the next bullet point here. It's about the people. And that is another key concept to understanding the Greek polis, is that it's not about all the stones and buildings or even temples. It's about the people. That is, the people make up the polis. An example of this is when Themistocles is arranging for the evacuation of Athens to Salamis. He is saving the city because he is taking the people with him. And he allows for the Persians to go ahead and sack the physical city. But in the end, there is always this idea that the polis will survive because the people are alive. And you can go ahead and rebuild the city, but you'll never be able to do that if the people are all dead. This is a very different idea in other empires such as Egypt, where cities are seen as the place where the king dwelled, or where all major administration functions were performed. The other point I'd like to make is this whole idea of aristocrats and noblemen versus kings. The polis was not ruled by a king, but by noblemen. And even though they are aristocrats, no one aristocrat can rule solely. Decisions are always made by ruling councils made up of aristocrats. So leadership is not determined by birth or royalty, but more by one's capability. So we can think of the polis almost as an aristocratic republic. That is, a republic run by a bunch of aristocrats. In ancient Greece, the first ideas of barbarians came about, and that related to the polis. That is, you were really not part of Greek society if you were not part of some polis. So if you were not a citizen in a polis, you were considered some kind of savage. We see some of this even today. The idea that if you live out in the country or outside cities, you are somehow backwards or seen as out of touch. So back to Greek times, if you did not live in a polis, you were not living by the rule of law. Laws can only come from inside the polis, not outside. And so the Greeks truly believed the only way to live well was to live in the polis. So you might ask, how were the polis boundaries decided? The various city-states in Greece were divided by natural boundaries, such as mountains or rivers. And if that isn't available, an imaginary boundary line is drawn up. Now, I might point out that most polis disputes were usually over those imaginary boundary lines. Now, the largest polis could control an entire area around them, as we see in the case of Athens, which controlled most of Attica. In fact, Athens was thought to be around 1,000 square miles. So you might wonder, how many citizens were in these cities? Well, both Aristotle and Plato came up with kind of the same number, around 5,000 citizens in the average polis. But many are much larger. Athens, for instance, at its height had around 50,000. I should point out, when we say citizen in ancient Greece, we mean adult male citizens. So these numbers are higher if you factor in all the women and children and even slaves. So a citizen can be any man or free man that lives inside a polis. In other empires like Persia or Mesopotamia, people that live inside cities are considered the king's subjects. So that's a great contrast from the Greek citizen, who is considered free. Okay, let's talk about economics for a second. The main economic driver in the polis was farming, and that's the case in all of the ancient world for the most part. What did they grow? Well, wheat for bread, olives, and fruits were the main staples. Later on, we'll see a marketplace in many of the cities, which will increase the economic output. Now, colonization started occurring around the mid-8th century, so around the 750s. And this shows that the polis is starting to grow quite a bit. The Greeks spread from mainland Greece all the way to places as far away as Sicily and even southern Italy. So this is taking and spreading the concept of the polis all across the Mediterranean. Also, the movement back to the sea puts the Greeks back in touch with places like Egypt and Mesopotamia. And of course, these were places that the Mycenaeans centuries earlier had already established trade routes with. But during the Dark Ages, all contact had been lost. Okay, one final point I would like to make is that the polis underwent a political development or movement from several phases. Now, I also want to point out that not every city followed this model. There were some cities that did not have a tyranny. There were other ones that did. So just keep in mind this is kind of a general template. And we will talk more about this when we talk about the two main city-states in Greece, Sparta and Athens. Another point I'd like to make, this occurred over several centuries, starting in Archaic Greece and moving right down into Classical Greece. So in phase the cities initially with the ruling aristocracy. And like we talked about before, these were not kings necessarily. They were just ruling aristocrats. Phase 2 would see a tyranny. Now, tyranny in these times was not necessarily a bad guy. These actually were considered somewhat good guys. Now, some of them did have bad reputations and would be criticized, giving that kind of a bad name. But in some respects, they were actually good, and they began to check the power of the ruling aristocracy. But it was a rule by one guy, but he was not a king. And we'll get into more of this when we talk about Athens and its history. But just keep this in the back of your mind for now. Phase 3 saw democracy, the last phase. And it was Athens who actually established the first democracy, and several of the other Greek city-states would soon follow. So that was kind of the last phase where we see a direct democracy, as they call it, where people elect their own leaders. And we will talk more about that when we talk about Athens. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. I will see you.
All right. I hope that helped. I hope that kind of put things into perspective as to where we are right now in our Greek history. Okay. Any questions after watching that? I think that was a really good video, kind of just to go through what we've already what we've learned. Richard, are you with us, Richard?
Yes, sir.
Would you like to read?
Sure.
All right, let's keep reading. Let's keep reading together, guys. The Greek Renaissance, again, 800 to 500. We're going to learn some new terms here. Let me just put this in here. So everybody follow along. I might call your name next, so please be ready.
During this 300-year period, there was a rediscovery of the surrounding Mediterranean area as trade and commerce increased with the adoption of the alphabet from Phoenicia. It was at this time that the Greek added vowels to the alphabet, making it representative of our alphabet today. The increase in trade is also reflected in the Oriental influence seen in the Greek art of the period. The concept of the Greek city-state polis developed in areas outside of the Dorian influence. Natural geographic boundaries, such as rivers and mountains, made the development of a politically unified Greek nation difficult, and thus Greek city-states acted as nations would today. The emphasis on state control continued to increase during this period, while the influence of kinship declined. In the period from approximately 750 to 510 BCE, many Greek city-states began to colonize extensively. Two notable exceptions were Sparta and Athens. Overpopulation, prolonged drought, and increasing commercial opportunities were all important reasons for colonizing. In some situations, colonies could also serve as a haven for people deemed social embarrassments. These colonies tended to be easy to set up, as a cross-section of society was forced by the state to initiate these colonies, which would use the same currency, laws, language, calendar, religious cults, and political organizations as the mother city metropolis. A type of mercantile system was established where raw materials provided by the colonies were used by the parent city, and where applicable, the finished products were then traded back to the colonies. The link between parent city and colony was obviously very substantial. As a result of colonization, the Greek culture was spread beyond the bounds of Greece, and it gave Greece a sense of cultural unity. As traders penetrated further inland, science and mathematics developed, and Greek pottery became well known. Perhaps most importantly, a Greek hoplite class developed, due largely to the significant increase in trade. Members of this segment of society had portable wealth but no land. As land was required to obtain political rights, a large wealthy class without an effective political existed in Greece. Such a situation led to many political difficulties and precipitated many city-states to opt for tyrants to rule over them. Changes in military strategies were also seen because the aristocratic claim of protecting society now would be shared with hoplites who could provide their own equipment.
Good. Okay. So some key terms here: metro, polis, hoplite, acro, agora, acropolis. These are all important Greek terms that you need to remember. The Acropoli, the Acropolis, the high city, Gara, the marketplace, hoplite, heavy armed individual, soldier. We're going to learn about the hoplite and the phalanx during the Greco-Persian Wars. Okay. And Dina, can you finish it off for us, the Greek city-state?
As the source and focus of their political, economic, and cultural life, each city-state was regarded as the only city by its residents. The city-state included a small defensible section of arable land. At the center of the polis was the agora, or the marketplace, where men gathered to gossip, discuss affairs of the day, and shop. Usually a fortified hilltop provided sanctuary during an attack. This was called the Acropolis.
Yeah, here's the Acropolis, the beautiful Acropolis, right? The high city. The high city. Raise your hand or just say, tell me in the chat if you've been to the Acropolis in Athens, Greece. Who's been there? Put it in the chat.
So I've been to Persepolis, if that counts.
Okay, good. Okay, Tommy, good. Anybody else? Tommy, have you gone there one time or have you been there more than once? Once. Okay, good. But don't worry, because if you haven't been there, let's see what it's all about. Let's see what it is. Let's take a look at Athens, Greece, and the Acropolis. We're all gonna go there now. You can say you've been there.
We'll start up there at the historic, cultural, and literal high point of any trip to Athens, the Acropolis. Like other hilltop sites in the ancient and literal high point of any trip to Athens, the Acropolis. Like other hilltop sites in the ancient Greek world, Athens' Acropolis, or high city, was both a place of worship and of refuge when under attack. Crowned by the mighty Parthenon temple, the Acropolis rises above modern Athens, a lasting testament to Greece's glorious golden age in the 5th century BC. Grand processions followed the Pan-Athenaic Way, which was a ceremonial path connecting the town below and the Acropolis. They'd pass through this imposing entryway and up to the religious heart of the city and the Parthenon. The Parthenon was perhaps the finest temple in the ancient world. Valiantly battling the acidic air of our modern world, it still stands with the help of ongoing restoration work. It was constructed in the 5th century BC and dedicated to the virgin goddess Athena. Seeing it today is awe-inspiring, but 2,500 years ago, in all its carved and brilliantly painted splendor. The adjacent Erechtheion is famous for its Porch of the Caryatids, 6 beautiful maidens functioning as columns. Dedicated to Athena and Poseidon, this was one of the most important religious buildings on the Acropolis. This, rather than the Parthenon, was the culmination of the Pan-Athenaic procession. At the foot of the Acropolis, the ancient Agora, or marketplace, sprawls out from its surviving temple. This is where, for 3,000 years, Athenians gathered. While the Acropolis was the center of ritual and ceremony, the Agora was the beating heart of ancient Athens. For some 800 years, starting in the 6th century BC, this was the hub of commercial, political, and social life. Visitors wander the remains of what was the city's principal shopping mall and administrative center. Exploring the Agora, it's fascinating to ponder the world of Plato and Aristotle in the age which laid the foundations for Western thinking about economics, democracy, logic, and more. The Stoa of Attila from the 2nd century BC was rebuilt in modern times to house the Agora's museum. With so little of the Agora still standing, this reconstruction makes it easier to imagine the site in its original glory. Crowds would gather in shady porticos like this to shop, socialize, or listen to the great philosophers of the age. In fact, Socrates spent much of his life right here, preaching the virtues of nothing in excess and urging those around him to know thyself. The Temple of Hephaestus, one of the best preserved and most typical of all Greek temples, dates from about 400 BC. Like the Parthenon, it's constructed in the simple Doric style. It housed big bronze statues of Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, and Athena, patroness of the city. Greek architecture evolved in stages. The capitals, or tops of the columns, were both functional and decorative. While just the tip of the architectural iceberg, these are handy indicators helping us identify the 3 main architectural orders, or styles. The earliest style, Doric, has flat, practical plates as capitals. In the next order, Ionic, the capitals are decorated with understated scrolls. The final order, Corinthian, popular later on with the Romans, features leafy capitals, boldly decorative, with no apologies necessary. How to remember all these? As the orders evolve, they gain syllables. Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. But for most travelers, the Agora is more than an architectural review. Strolling in the footsteps of Socrates is your best opportunity to commune with the epic Greek past.
Okay. Well, once COVID is over, Stephanie, you can travel to Greece, okay? Once this is over, you can travel. All right? You still got lots of time to head over to Athens and Rome. Okay. All right, we are doing great. We are doing great. So before I get you started on your work, I just want to go through this last PowerPoint here. This is just going to go through some of the art and architecture. So let's just take a look. So again, our aim is this time period for today. And here we have the famous vase, Greek vase. Okay. Again, the city-states. This is a really good picture here I have. It's very clear. Greek colonies again. Here's some leaders we're going to be learning in the next couple days. So again, the hoplite. Remember the hoplite of the 8th century, the Greek soldier. Here's a hoplite phalanx in the vase here, around 640. A Corinthian vase. Here's Nestor's cup, around 700, okay, from Naples, Italy. Nestor's cup. Some more Greek art. You could see, again, this is not the classic, so this is the Archaic period. You can see the pottery is very basic, right? Very basic, geometric. Okay, so take a look at these different types of vases here. Very plain, very basic. And again, we have Kouros here and Kor. Okay. Again, this is a lot of the pottery of the Archaic period. I'm going to go through now. So to the left, you would see this is a monument in Archaic Greece, and to the right, this is a monument in Classical Greece. So you could take a look at the differences, right? The differences of realism here compared to 300 years prior. To the left here would be a vase from the Archaic period, and in the middle here would be a vase from Classical Greece. So what I would like you to do now, is using the internet, okay, and you're going to have to use the internet for this, find images of artifacts that are of Athenian origin from both the Archaic and Classical periods. Okay, I want you to take a look. I just want you to view the differences in architecture, in pottery, in sculpture. And I want you to do a comparative analysis of each, indicating the significant changes you see. Why do you think these changes have occurred during these periods? So choose one: sculpture, architecture, pottery. Take a look at the difference from Archaic and how it changed into the Classical period. And tell me what you see. Compare the major changes. For example, look at the monuments. Look at the sculptures here. Right? Look at the vase between Archaic and this one here, which is Classical. Okay, so that's the first thing I want you to do. Again, you need to use the internet for this. You can just go to Google Images, that's fine, and type in Archaic or Classical periods. Lots will come up. And of course, I have the colonization questions. Okay, Greek colonization questions. There's 5 very easy questions, very easy. You can either look at your PowerPoints or the textbook using these pages. Only about 5 pages. And it's right here. This is your textbook. I posted it. Okay. How does that sound?
It sounds good, sir.
Okay. All right, I'm done talking. I've been talking too much, so it's time to get to work. Okay, so you're going to do the textbook questions 1 to 5 and compare. I want you